Joseph Stalin in 22 minutes. Joseph Stalin was born on December 18, 1878, in Gori, a town in eastern Georgia. His parents, Vissarion Djukashvili and Ekaterina Galadze, had a tumultuous relationship and disagreed on his future. While his mother hoped he would become a priest, his father wanted him to follow in his footsteps as a cobbler. However, at the age of 10, Joseph's mother left his abusive and alcoholic father, and they sought help from a family friend. Joseph's academic journey faced challenges due to a smallpox epidemic that scarred his face and an accident that injured his left arm. Nonetheless, he excelled academically. In 1894, Joseph joined the spiritual seminary school in Tbilisi, where he did well initially. However, his performance declined after he openly declared himself an atheist and disrespected local monks. He delved into forbidden publications like Chernyshevsky's What Is to Be Done and Karl Marx's Capital, becoming a great admirer of socialist ideologies. Growing resentment against the oppressive Tsarist government led Joseph to become involved in secret socialist workers' meetings in Georgia. He became active in the local resistance, which ultimately led to his departure from the spiritual seminary school. As he looked back on Russia's history, Joseph recognized the strengths and weaknesses of the centralized power. He witnessed the shift from Alexander III's strong leadership to Nicholas II's timid and ineffective rule, leading to unrest and revolution that eventually overthrew the Romanov dynasty. Living in Georgia, which was treated as a mere colony by the Russian Empire, Joseph witnessed the oppression of the Georgian people and their growing resentment. He started his involvement in politics working as a meteorologist in Tbilisi and reading revolutionary literature. He gave talks to workers, organized strikes, and became a prominent member of the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party, later known as the Communist Party. Joseph's role in shaping Russia's future grew as he rose through the ranks of the RSDLP's Tbilisi branch. He organized protests and strikes and even faced imprisonment and exile in Siberia due to his radical activities. Despite being a young man at the time, Joseph Stalin played a significant part in the turbulent period of Russia's history. Joseph Stalin, at the time, turned Siberia into a tool of terror and order, sending millions of dissidents, political enemies, and class traitors to labor camps in the Russian hinterland. Despite being exiled to Siberia earlier in his life, he was determined to return to Tbilisi and assist in editing an underground newspaper, The Proletarian Struggle. As disillusionment with the RSDLP's methods and objectives grew, the party split into various sub-factions, with Joseph siding with the Bolsheviks under Vladimir Lenin. In the midst of the 1905 revolution, Joseph formed the Bolshevik Battle Squad to counter rioting and ethnic violence in Georgia. This period marked his first meeting with Vladimir Lenin during a party conference in St. Petersburg. He continued his violent campaign, engaging in armed robberies and other illegal activities, which eventually led to his arrest and exile. Throughout the years, despite facing multiple arrests and exiles, Joseph's influence within the Bolshevik movement grew. He became one of Lenin's closest allies and adopted the pseudonym Stalin. After the Bolsheviks seized power during the November 1917 revolution, Joseph recognized the threats to their regime and supported the use of the Cheka, the Bolshevik secret police, to crush opposition, resulting in significant casualties. With the Russian economy weakened, Joseph advocated for peace with Germany and Austria, leading to the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in 1918. Despite their success in ending Russia's involvement in the First World War, Joseph Stalin's regime faced resistance, including the Russian Civil War that splintered the country into multiple regions and states vying for power and independence. With the help of Leon Trotsky, they managed to suppress their opponents, despite foreign support for the White Russians. In the 1920s, they regained control of Russia. During the conflict, Stalin was stationed in Tsaritsi, now Stalingrad, to oversee the Red Army's campaign against the Whites. His command was met with criticism from fellow Bolsheviks due to significant losses and ruthless treatment of deserters. As a committed communist, Stalin advocated for terror as a means to eliminate opposition. In the aftermath of the Civil War, Stalin played a role in the Polish-Soviet War, often disobeying orders and facing internal criticism. The war ended with a peace treaty favoring Poland. With the country facing food shortages and chaos, Stalin implemented a policy of food requisitioning in 1921. leading to mass starvation and famine in southern Russia. Lenin's stroke in 1922 left him partially paralyzed, and Stalin acted as his messenger and controlled his communications. Lenin's testament, which criticized Stalin and other leaders, could have jeopardized his career, but it was suppressed by Stalin after Lenin's death in January 1924. A power struggle for leadership in the Communist Party ensued, with Stalin positioning himself as the leading candidate. His main rival was Leon Trotsky. But Stalin's strategic control over party appointments and alliances gave him an advantage in consolidating power within the party. Trotsky began criticizing Joseph Stalin, advocating for a reversal of Lenin's economic policy and forming alliances against Stalin's growing power in the Soviet Union. As General Secretary, Stalin utilized the widespread bureaucracy to gather information and solidify his position. He capitalized on Trotsky's isolation within the party and aligned himself with influential figures, sidelining his rival and replacing enemies in key government positions. Trotsky's exile made Stalin the de facto leader within the Central Committee. During the 1920s, concerns arose about the capitalist aspects of Lenin's economic policy, and dwindling grain supplies prompted Stalin to revise it. He initiated the first 5-year plan, emphasizing collectivization and the growth of heavy industry, rapidly industrializing the Soviet Union. Collectivization led to the control of affluent farmers, known as kulaks, under state authority, further consolidating Stalin's power. This aggressive industrialization and collectivization paved the way for the Soviet Union's capability to sustain the war against Nazi Germany, ultimately leading to victory. Joseph Stalin and the Central Committee reacted to the assertion of capitalism, drop in food production, the state-run system of agriculture, which replaced the kulaks with collectives and communes, saw a decline in productivity due to the lack of positive incentives for the communal farmers. Riots and uprisings occurred in the late 1920s, suppressed by the Red Army and the NKVD, which later merged with the secret police to become a tool of terror and suppression. In 1929, Stalin further tightened control over the Soviet Union, bringing schools, newspapers, and libraries fully under state control and effectively outlawing religion. This marked an effort to achieve total state control over all aspects of life. Stalin's choices were between allowing some private enterprise and individual freedoms, which might threaten socialism and communism, or enacting socialist principles, which required suppressing individual freedoms to build a true communist society without social classes or private ownership. This ideological dilemma has been a subject of debate among capitalist historians, who view it as a weakness in socialism's attempt to establish a communist utopia. In his pursuit of implementing socialism, Joseph Stalin faced the challenge of resistance from those unwilling to give up their private property. To address this opposition, he resorted to using force and suppression, leading to extensive state control over speech and thought to crush dissent. However, the effectiveness of true socialism as a form of governance, along with its economic merits, remains a highly contentious topic due to the absence of successful class-free communal societies. Stalin's policies concentrated power, creating an extremely ruthless and all-powerful dictatorship by the early 1930s, with no outside influence. However, these policies led to unintended consequences, as seen in the devastating famine of early 1932, which resulted in the deaths of nearly 3 million people. The famine arose from harsh requisitions of grain, diverting most of the country's food to population centers and causing massive shortages in rural areas. Additionally, selling grain supplies abroad further exacerbated the situation. After the murder of his close friend Sergei Kirov, head of the Communist Party in Leningrad, in December 1934, Stalin initiated the Great Terror and the Great Purge. From 1936 to 1938, the NKVD, under my orders, cracked down on the Soviet population, the Red Army, and the Communist Party itself. Countless individuals, including high-ranking officials and perceived dissidents, were arrested, tried in public show trials, and often executed or exiled. The death toll from this purge is estimated to be around 1.25 million, and it targeted a wide range of people, including former aristocrats, business owners, and clergymen who posed little or no threat. To instill fear and obedience, Stalin also used the gulags, a system of forced labor camps where people were subjected to inhumane conditions, and many perished. From 1930 to 1950, around 18 million people passed through these camps, and the death toll is believed to be about 1.5 million. One significant target of the Great Purge was the Red Army's officer corps. Hundreds of officers and generals were arrested and executed, along with former White Army soldiers from the civilian population. This purge severely weakened the fighting capability of the Red Army, causing difficulties in responding to the subsequent invasion by Nazi Germany. Anticipating Germany's hostility towards Bolshevism, Stalin began preparations for a potential war with them. However, the previous purges had already undermined the strength of the Soviet armed forces, leading to initial setbacks and heavy losses when the German invasion occurred. Regrettably, the purges within the Red Army severely diminished its fighting capacity under Joseph Stalin's leadership. Though the army had plenty of equipment, much of it was outdated or in disrepair. To buy time, Stalin pursued an appeasement policy with Germany, resulting in a non-aggression pact between the two nations in August 1939. After Germany defeated Poland, they occupied the eastern part, as agreed. During the occupation, thousands of Polish officers and intellectuals were captured and executed on Stalin's orders. This action led Britain and France to declare war on Germany, and Stalin offered Germany support with food and oil supplies. Stalin then turned his attention to Finland, viewing it as an easy target to create a buffer against possible conflict with Hitler and to secure naval ports in the Baltic Sea. He demanded Finland cede territory and islands, but they refused, leading to a full-scale invasion in November 1939, despite having the world's largest army. The Soviet Union suffered a humiliating defeat against the well-prepared Finnish defense network. They lost 250,000 soldiers, while Finland lost only 25,000. This defeat prompted significant changes in the Red Army's tactics training and equipment to prepare for future conflicts. Stalin took responsibility for the massive losses endured by the Red Army during the Winter War and acknowledged his mistakes. In response, he made changes to the leadership, dismissing Klement Voroshilov as defense commissar. The failures in the invasion of Finland exposed weaknesses in the Red Army, which were addressed to prepare for the looming German invasion. However, the Soviet Union's ineffectiveness in the Winter War inadvertently encouraged Adolf Hitler to hasten his own invasion plans. During Joseph Stalin's early years as Soviet premier, he perceived France and Britain rather than Germany. However, as German National Socialism and fascism began to rise, he recognized the seriousness of Hitler's Third Reich and started to strengthen the Soviet armed forces. The non-aggression pact with Germany provided a false sense of security, as Stalin believed that a war between Germany and the Western powers would buy him time to bolster his defenses. Stalin hoped the strength of his armed forces would deter Hitler from initiating any conflict. However, Germany's swift victory over France and the Allies in just 6 weeks, during May to June 1940, after Hitler's failure to invade Britain during the Battle of Britain, he set his sights on the Soviet Union. The invasion, codenamed Redbeard or Barbarossa, involved 3 massive army thrusts comprising 3 million German troops using blitzkrieg tactics to encircle. Despite popular belief, Stalin did not receive concrete intelligence about Hitler's true intentions before the invasion began. Stalin's plans also involved asserting control over the Baltic states and northern Romania to use them as buffer zones between the Soviet Union and Germany. Following their incorporation into the Union of Soviet Republics in August 1940, mass arrests and deportations were carried out to suppress the local populations. Despite the initial disastrous losses suffered by the Red Army during Barbarossa, Stalin's forces managed to make one of the greatest military comebacks in history, eventually defeating Hitler's Germany. The claim that Stalin failed to prepare the Soviet Union for war is disputed, as the Red Army had considerable manpower, tanks, and aircraft. Though the large size of the army made resupplying and modernization, the effectiveness of the Soviet armed forces and equipment against a major European power had not been tested before, adding uncertainty. It should be noted that in 1941, the German army had recently achieved swift victories over France and Britain, making them a formidable force during the early stages of Barbarossa. The Soviet Union faced the challenge of confronting the most highly organized fighting machine at that time. Since World War II, various theories have emerged regarding the Soviet Union's triumph over Nazi Germany. Some argue that Hitler's incompetence led him to declare war on the wrong countries at the wrong time, while others consider the outcome to have been a close call. Some even suggest that Joseph Stalin's leadership was questionable, and his success was primarily due to entrusting his generals with their duties. However, in reality, all parties involved, including Stalin, Hitler, and the military commanders, made significant mistakes during the conflict in Russia. Attributing blame or praise to any single individual or pinpointing a specific mistake as the turning point in the conflict oversimplifies the complexities of the war. Despite being economically poorer than the Western powers, the Soviet Union's population advantage was a critical factor, with approximately 200 million people. Including around 45 under the age of 20 in 1941, Stalin could mobilize a substantial pool of around 45 million men if necessary. In contrast, Hitler's fighting-age male population was limited to about 15 million. As the war progressed, both the German and Russian armies suffered considerable losses. However, Germany faced a challenge in replacing its fallen soldiers due to a smaller pool of potential troops. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, had the advantage of replacing its lost soldiers with men of fighting age. By the war's end, Germany had to rely on reserves of men who were not fit for active combat, including children and pensioners. A notable aspect of the Soviet effort was the significant contribution of women in the armed forces. About 800,000 women served during World War II. Some in combat roles like fighter pilots, bomber crews, and snipers. The remarkable accomplishments of individuals like Tatiana Kosterina, a master sniper with 120 kills, exemplify the crucial role played by women in the Soviet Union's victory. Her bravery earned her the posthumous title of Hero of the Soviet Union. Geography played a significant role in favor of the Russians during the war. Losing vast territories to the Germans stretched their supply lines to the limit, compounded by freezing Russian winters and Germany's ill-prepared industry. The impact of the Western Allies on Germany during the conflict cannot be overlooked. Blockades, Arctic convoys, bombings, Enigma code breaking, and the Axis defeat in North Africa posed numerous challenges to the Germans. At the war's outset, the German perspective saw initial success in Russia. The Wehrmacht's ability to hold its ground against overwhelming odds showcased the talent of its commanders and the soldiers' fighting ability. Hitler's armies achieved near-total success initially, with Soviet deficiencies also contributing to this outcome. Regarding my decision not to move troops to the German border before the invasion, it could be argued that it was the correct strategy. Blitzkrieg aimed to surround and destroy enemy forces in the field, so holding back troops was a prudent move to avoid immediate eradication. Soviet counterattacks caused severe delays and losses to the Germans, making the seizure of Moscow in 1941 impossible, according to recent research. Soviet army and industry were geared towards fighting long-term wars, and as the conflict persisted, our advantage in manpower, logistics, and industrial capacity became increasingly significant. The war in the East became a brutal clash of ideologies, with both sides fighting fiercely, defying traditional rules of warfare. Numbers played a critical role, and Stalin recognized this better than anyone, understanding that victory lay in manpower, logistics, and industrial capacity. The production figures of the T-34 tank exemplify our numerical advantage. We produced large quantities of T-34 and T-34, 85 tanks, far surpassing Germany's tank output throughout the war, including various models from light to heavy tanks. In summary, the war in the East hinged on numbers and the Soviet Union's ability to harness its vast resources, industrial capacity, and manpower proved pivotal in achieving victory over Germany. During the war, the Soviet Union significantly outproduced Germany in tanks and self-propelled guns with nearly 3-to-1 ratio. The production figures excluded aircraft, transport, vehicles, food, oil, and manpower, which were more abundant for the Soviet Union. The Soviets showcased remarkable industrial prowess by dismantling and relocating hundreds of factories out of German reach. As the leader during World War II, Joseph Stalin faced the immense challenge of overseeing the transportation of numerous factories, causing strain on the already burdened rail network. The Soviet Union's economy was entirely geared towards a long-term industrialized war, unlike Germany. The Soviets' resilience and refusal to collapse, even in the face of the German invasion, played a pivotal role in their victory. The entry of the United States into the war further tilted the scales in favor of the Allies. The war saw heavy losses on both sides until the Germans were ultimately defeated in key battles like Stalingrad and Kursk. Stalin, despite being criticized for his actions, led the Soviet Union to triumph, resulting in the defeat of Hitler's Germany at the cost of significant casualties. World War II transformed the Soviet Union into a world power, though the United States emerged as the sole superpower due to its nuclear weapons development. Stalin accelerated the Soviet atomic program after the US used nuclear weapons against Japan, leading to the USSR becoming the second superpower. Stalin's health deteriorated over time, and he suffered from serious ailments. Yet he refused proper medical attention. He died in 1953 from a massive cerebral hemorrhage. Many capitalists argue that previous attempts to establish true communism in socialist states have failed due to resistance from people unwilling to give up their families, property, and assets. This often led to the use of force and resulted in violence and millions of deaths. Nevertheless, some individuals around the world still hope for the realization of communism. They believe that true communism has never been fully implemented, as power-hungry leaders like Stalin denied workers the right to govern their own destinies. Stalin, considered one of the most successful dictators in history, ruled Russia for nearly 3 decades, transforming it into a superpower rivaled only by the United States. While some argue that the deaths of millions were justified for industrialization, others contend that this could have been achieved through free markets and property rights.